Continuing where we left off from the previous nesting symbols animated video, part 1, we're going to push forward towards part 2, and here we're going to cover the flashing light, and then we're also going to cover how to animate everything together really nice and cleanly. So there's a couple ways we could animate the flashing light, and what I want to do first is I'm already in, here's my scene 1. If you're in your scene 1, just double click on your police car, and now you're within that symbol. I know it's confusing, but they, as I showed you before, they all have their own timeline. So what I'm going to do is on my flashing light, I'm going to create a new layer, and I want this to be underneath, and I'm going to just do flashing light. And I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop my flashing light up here. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm just going to place it sort of where I think a flashing light would be on a police car. So now that I have this here, I'm not going to animate this directly on the stage because it's a symbol, and it's going to be all nested within my police car. So I'm going to double click here, and now I'm inside my police car, but I'm also inside the flashing light. So I've got scene 1, police car, flashing light. So I'm within each one of these. So they each have their own timeline. Now in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do really basic frame by frame color change. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select my fill bucket tool, and I'm going to just select a black color, and I'm going to go ahead and make the first frame black. I'm going to go ahead and press F6. Now I have that same frame in 2 different frames. Frame 1 is a black fill color as well as frame 2. Frame 1 is the same as frame 2, excuse me. So I'm going to go ahead, change this, and I'm going to switch it to a radial gradient. And I'm going to have it be red. And I'm just going to go ahead and click right in there, and it'll change the color. Very simple. So using my greater than and less than signs or comma and period, I have it change from this to this. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and press F6 again, and now I have it go from the color black to radial red, and now I'm going to change this to go to a regular red. So now it goes black, radial red, red. Now I'm going to press F6 again, and I'm just going to go ahead and repeat that process, and I'm going to change this back to radial red, and just click where I want the center point to be, and then I'm going to press F6 again, and I'm going to go ahead and change it to black, and then I'm going to press F6 again, and I'm going to repeat this process, except instead of this time it being red, I'm going to make it blue. So I'm going to go here to my fill color, select a radial blue, and always be sure to double check your frames. So it's black, radial red, red, radial red, black. So it's just a repeating process. This one is going to be radial blue, F6, regular blue, F6, radial blue, and the radial gradients are down here at the bottom. And F6. And you know what? I'm going to undo that last F6. So now I have it go from black to red, to radial red, to red, to radial red, to black, to radial blue, to radial blue, and that's going to be my last frame on frame 8. Because after this, it's going to repeat the process going back to frame 1, because we're going to have this animation loop, and it's going to go to the black. So once it stops on this radial red, it's going to repeat the process going back to frame 1, and it's going to play black, and then go ahead and loop back through the animation. So now I'm going to go back into my police car, and I'm just going to go ahead and play this, and you'll see it just goes ahead and plays through. Now it stops here because I have it at 23 frames. As I was mentioning before, timelines have their own each symbol has its own timeline. So let's just go ahead and say I want to expand this one more frame. So I'm just going to click and drag and highlight on the very last frame of all of these. Oop, that didn't work. So let's try this. I'm going to highlight on the very last frame, and I'm going to do insert frame. And I inserted one more frame so that it will repeat the process back to this original starting point, because this flashing light is 8 frames, it can loop 3 times in a 24 frame animation. So I'm just going to go ahead and take this one here. I'm clicking on the little diamond and dragging it over. Now it got a little complicated on you, but that's kind of the point. We want to kind of test what your skills here and try to allow you to problem solve some of these issues that you might run into. But now what you have here is the flashing light. It repeats back because 8 times 3 is 24. So it's 24. I'm going to double click on my flashing light. It plays for 8 frames in here. Going back into my police car symbol, you'll notice it plays 3 times. So once, twice, 3 times. And then it'll loop back to the beginning. As well, while that is animating and flashing on that light, we can take a look at here and notice that the wheels are also spinning. So now we've gone ahead and we've created a nested symbol. Now, the reason this isn't blue and it's still animating is because we didn't tell this to have a motion tween on it. All the animation is happening within here in a frame-by-frame style, similar to the bouncing ball that we did, except this time we just used a fill bucket color tool and changed the color. Now, even if you're not the greatest at math, you should kind of be able to figure out that 8 times 3 is 24 frames, and really just simple basic mathematics. It goes into sort of figuring out the timelines. I mean, that's the trickiest part about nesting symbols, is trying to figure out how many frames each animation can play if you plan on looping it, so it animates nice and clean and loops very well. So now I'm going to go back into scene 1, and now I have this playing for 120 seconds, and I'm going to go ahead and press Control Enter. And there you go. So now I have this animating for 120 seconds. It should loop very, very cleanly back to the very first frame, because 120 divided by 24 is 5, which would be 5 seconds. Now, one last thing we can do is, because we have this car animating all on one layer. Notice how I only have one layer here in my scene 1. Scene 1. I have the capability of animating this all very, very nice and cleanly, versus having everything on the same stage and then sort of animating against each other in a way. So what I'm going to do is show you really quickly. I'm going to bring this car off stage just to show you. And then I'm going to create a motion tween. And I'm going to go out to frame 60. And I'm just going to go ahead and drag that out there. So now, when I go ahead and play this back, my car enters the stage, and then it stays put in the center of the stage. So for half the animation, it's entering stage to the center, and then it is just stays put there for the additional 60 frames. And what we would do here to create the illusion of movement is what we're going to incorporate in our next project, which is the escape animation. So we're going to create an animated nested symbol, But once we have our nested symbol animating, we're going to animate the background going in the opposite direction to create the illusion of movement. And that's another thing that animation is. It's the illusion of movement. So going back to the scene here, just a quick recap. When we go ahead and we look at this sheriff car, police car, I double click on it. Now I'm inside my police car. I have my two wheels rotating on separate layers, and I have my flashing light animating in its own separate layer. So I can double click on that. So now I'm inside the police car, inside scene 1, inside the police car, inside the flashing light. It's confusing, but each one of these has its own timeline. You can also go into, let's just say, the tire, and you can see the tire has its own little timeline as well. So you can go ahead and rename this. This one doesn't have any animation in it though. So I'm going to go back into my police car, and if I double click on this one, you'll notice because they're duplicates of each other, when I renamed this layer in the back tire, it also renamed it for the front tire because they're actually the same symbol. So now that I've got this all set, I can go back into scene 1, and let's just say I wanted to go ahead and add another police car. I'll just call this layer Sheriff. I can go to my police car layer, drag and drop it, and I'm just going to show you really quickly. Now I've got two police cars, and I didn't have to do any additional animation to it. All I had to do was just drag and drop it, so I only had to create the animation once. That's all I've got for you on animating nested symbols. It might be a little bit difficult for you at first, but once you kind of get the hang of double clicking on your symbol and then seeing what's inside that symbol, you should be able to start to get the hang of it. And it's important that you get the hang of it quickly because it is sort of tricky at first to wrap your brain around. But if you think of it as like a Windows file organization with folders, like Windows Explorer or Apple's Finder, it's the same thing except sort of with symbols, they're called. If you picture these as folders, it's like inside each folder has its own files. So inside the police car folder, inside the flashing light folder, subfolder, I have my flashing light file, if that makes any sense. So I hope you enjoyed the lab, and we're going to expand on this in the next project. Message me if you have any questions.